Hello everyone, it's my favorite day of the week. Today we're doing a live stream and we're going to show you how to create modular buildings with the watercolor city style. I'm super excited about this. Basically modular buildings, we're going to be kind of creating your own, showing you how to make your own customizable buildings. Sometimes the stock stamps don't really have everything you're looking for, maybe that Bard College, maybe how to make a modern building, a sci-fi, or how to make a siege workshop, or whatever it is, this customizable building, because stock images might not have everything that you need. So we'll show you how to put that together in this stream, because we just recently, I think it was last week, we released the modular pack as well as another pack with trees and things like that. So that's really exciting. So go check that stuff out. I think I only just have really one quick announcement, and I believe we just released the Valentine's Day special. This is kind of the seasonal art that we release this time of year. It's got hearts and stuff. It's really, really nice art. So hoping to see some Valentine's Day art, some maps on our Discord. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, well, I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's just jump right in. You're going to want to clone and edit this map right here to follow along. If you're following along live here on Twitch, you'll find that link in the chat. If you're following on YouTube, it'll be in the video description. So clone and edit that map if you want to follow along. Let's go ahead and open it up and get started. Now, modular buildings are actually really fun to put together. It just requires a little bit of a process, because sometimes it's hard to know where to start when you're trying to put together these buildings. So we're going to help you go through a process that's going to make it so much easier to kind of put these kind of things together, and quickly too, because that's really the whole point of this, is that we not just how to make really good looking modular buildings, but how to do it in a very quick fashion. Because I know some of you are DMs and you don't have all day. You don't have weeks to kind of put together some of these customizable buildings. So we're going to take you through a process that'll make you get it done real fast. Let's go ahead and just go through what that process is first. And first, what we do is you kind of build from the ground up, like you do in reality, right? So the first step in that process is to make a foundation. We're going to create the main structure. That's the largest part of the building. And then the pop-outs are just extensions from the main structure. Ancillary buildings, or outbuildings, these are things like maybe a shack, a tool shed, maybe you're making a university like a Bard's College, and so you need to have some dormitories. So those are basically ancillary buildings. Then we're going to also do access, which is basically your staircases and your doors, where those are going to be positioned. The roof details, vegetation, and then ground details. So we're going to go through all of that stuff in this kind of process. And what we're going to be doing is I've created these kind of spaces right here where we're going to go ahead and put together some pre-made things that I put together, and I'm going to show you the process of it. So this kind of space right here is the space that we're going to be working with. Now everything, these pre-made village blocks right here, all this is at 100% scale. Just know that if you want to make a larger city, or you'll obviously want to scale it down. But for now, we're going to work with 100% scale. And right where you see these little tool symbol right here, that's going to be our excavation site. That's where we're going to go ahead and put together everything. And we're going to start with human first, and we'll do Elven, Dwarven, Desert, Modern, and Sci-Fi. Since we don't really have Modern or a Sci-Fi style yet, or pack for this style, I'll show you how to put them together, just makeshift with the stamps that we have. So that way you can kind of have at least some kind of knowledge about Modern and kind of Sci-Fi buildings. With human, I'm going to make, I mentioned a Bard College, so let's make a Bard College, and we're going to follow that process that we talked about right here. So let me go ahead and just zoom in here. I want to get nice and close so you can see what we're putting together. Make sure that we have the process there so you can see what we're doing. I'll just move it out of the way here. So with the Bard's College, remember we talked about that first thing is the foundation, right? We've established the theme, which is that Bard College. So now we know what kind of things to add in the details, right? So we're going to build a foundation first. You know what works really good for building a foundation is those wonderful platform stamps. Okay, the platform stamps. What the platform stamps have, which is really helpful, is it has this baked in shadow on the outside of it. You can see right here. And that baked in shadow gives it the illusion of height because it's using ambient occlusion, which means that there is a built-in shadow into the stamp. So it's already going to create this illusion of depth. So this is that foundation that the whole building, that everything is going to be built upon. And it just gives it an extra sense of depth. If all your blocks are kind of flat, then it looks that way. It just looks flat. So platforms, it's labeled platforms. Look for that in the catalog, stamp catalog, and just scale them to the scale that you want. And they work absolutely fantastic. There's multiple different shapes that you can work with. So they're absolutely fantastic. Remember, we're working from the ground up. So foundation starts first. Everything sits on that foundation. After you do that, you work on the main structure, okay? And the main structure was put together with the modular buildings. And what I've done is I've created a U shape with it. And putting these together is not complex. Let me go ahead and open up that group and I'll kind of show you the individual pieces for that. So let me go back into the Bard College, open this main structure up. You'll notice that each one of these are kind of made with modular pieces. And what I did is I just created one of these long arms first. Not too hard. I just created one of these arms first. And then I copy and I pasted it over to this side to create this other wing. And then I flipped and rotated to create this wing. So less work. Start with making the main shapes that you want and then piece them together and make sure that the shadows are consistent. Notice that the shadow is all on the outside part of the building and not on the inside. So you have to pay very close attention to the shadows so that way there's not contradicting shadows. I'll give you an example of what that might look like. If you rotate like this, you'll notice that there's an inconsistency. The shadow is on the wrong side. So just make sure that you decide the two directions in which the shadows will face, because you can notice that the shadows create kind of this L shape right here. The shadows are on the left and on the upper or north side of the building. So there's going to be two positions where the shadows are going to be. So to make sure you think about that as you're assembling your pieces. Now, after you've made the main structure, you do what's called pop-outs. And a pop-out is just an extension of the main building, okay? And I'll go ahead and put some pop-outs here. And the pop-outs also include some, not really what I would call a roof detail, but something that put on the roof. These are what are referred to right here. These are called cupolas. And I went ahead and just put 4 or 5 cupolas total on here. And a cupola is basically just a part of the roof that kind of goes up and it has holes in it and it allows for air to come through. So I've used these stamps to act as a cupola, and then the pop-outs is this structure right here. And I just placed it right up against the roof. I made sure that the line work lines up correct. You wouldn't want to push this all the way up to here. You'd want to make sure that it lines up with it. So when you're making your pop-outs, make sure that the lines are aligned properly. So 5 cupolas and 1 pop-out that might act as an entrance, or it might be a dorm. We don't really know. Yeah, I like that word too, first time chatter. Tankmonious. Yeah, great word, cupola. Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So now after you've kind of done that main structure, and what's really nice about this is that now we know we started with the largest thing first, right? The foundation, and then that larger structure, the main structure. And what's really helpful about that is it now gives us room, and it tells us where to put things, the negative space, what to work with. And so that works really well. Now that we have that main structure, we can go ahead and add, and I believe it's going to be our ancillary buildings. And for an ancillary building, I think I'll just put 1 down, or maybe 2. Let me find the ancillary buildings. And ancillary buildings are just buildings that are not attached to the main structure. So they're ancillary or outbuildings. And I've used the same stamp that I used for a cupola to kind of create a shed. This tiny little structure right here is a shed. And this right here will act as maybe a dorm. It could be an office. It could be an outbuilding for maybe a different kind of class. It could be detention. It could be whatever you want it to be. But throwing in outbuildings or ancillary buildings kind of creates more of this kind of block feel. It kind of makes it feel more realistic, because you would expect a large campus or even a small campus such as this Bard College to have dorms and other such out or ancillary buildings. So always factor that in. After you've added that in, then we'll go over our access. And access is super important. You've noticed that I've already created access with the foundations. These stairs right here are in the same stamp set as the platforms. So I recommend that you use them. Okay. All right. So notice the access here, these stairs that take you into this kind of courtyard right here. The stair goes up here up to this courtyard. So there is access. Notice that I didn't put the stairs right in front of these buildings right here, where you would just run into a wall. So remember, access. It's going to lead you onto the main part of the campus and into that square or courtyard. I also want to mention something about the modular, the main structure. Notice that I did do something different. I used these open gable, where you can see that white triangle right there, to kind of denote like the front of it. By creating this open gable element, it makes it look like that's the front of the whole block, or the front of the university. Notice right here, this pop out, there's not an open gable. Notice this does not have an open gable. Just these two right here have this open gable to give this impression that this is the front of the building. And the stairs also help to denote, hey, that is the front of the building. After we've added that, we're going to want to go ahead and do access. I remember access, we already did access for the foundation, but let's go ahead and show the rest of the access as well. And this is in a stamp set called Doors, by the way. So I've go ahead and just showed that there is a extra entrance from this street, from that pop out that goes into the campus. And then I added a entrance that goes into here as well, that kind of goes from the courtyard. So you can access the building two different ways, from the courtyard and from the street, two locations from the street. So three kind of access points. And remember, access is important. Now that I know that that door is right here, I won't be placing anything in front of that door, because it will block getting into that building. Now, after I've added that part, we're going to go ahead and put in roof details. We're going to continue going up a little bit. So I'll add in my roof details. Let's see here. Dormers and windows. Let's go ahead and throw those in. Okay. One moment. So these little windows right here on the roof are labeled as roof windows, but in architecture, they're called a dormer. Okay. And the dormer is just a part of the window that pops out above the roof a little bit. So these roof windows are called dormers. And I've also used these doors to act as kind of a window sill or a part of the window. And I've lined it up so it looks like it's all lined up. All right. So when you're kind of placing details like that, that kind of gives it some more symmetry to it. And it makes it look kind of nice, because you don't want your build to be completely symmetrical unless it's maybe like a temple or some kind of structure that's deliberately symmetrical. For the most part, if you do make a very symmetrical building, you'll want to add something that breaks the symmetry, called asymmetry. That's why I added in the pop out and these outbuildings right here to break up that symmetry. So adding a asymmetrical element will be very, 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 very helpful to your build. Let's go ahead and check the rest of it. I'm going to go ahead and select all of them and turn on the rest of them, because what's left is basically details and vegetation. Now, details are what are going to help you to make sure that the player or the viewer will know what kind of structure it is. Because it's a Bard College, I created a note using bushes. And then what I did is, after creating the note with bushes, I took one of those stamps, one of those bushes, changed the blend mode to lighten and put it over it, so that way you don't see any of the line work inside. So details are how you decide what the building is. Like, you wouldn't know what kind of structure this is unless there was some kind of details to show what kind of building it is, right? So again, because it's a Bard College, I created a note using bushes. So it's very clear, like, oh, well, this must be either a music college or Bard College or whatever it might be. And I've also added some more vegetation. It's always nice to throw in vegetation on campuses, larger buildings, larger blocks, parliament buildings, whatever. They generally have vegetation that's been planted very deliberately to give the greenery to complement whatever the structure it is that you're making. So I put a large tree in the corner here, and I've also put some hedges that kind of create this kind of enclosure that goes around that note. And then I also put in some light sources with some lamps, because it's always nice to throw in some kind of light sources. It adds kind of a sense of depth, and the lighting makes the map look nice. And the last detail that I added were some benches so that people can sit outside on a nice day and they can play the violin, the cello, wind, string, brass, whatever the bard's instrument of choice might be. Bugle, panpipe, recorder, doesn't matter, okay? But they have that nice space where they can go and they can kind of practice outside in the nice weather. So the process is simple. Start from the ground up, foundation, main structure, the pop-outs, ancillary buildings, access, roof details, vegetation, and then ground details. And remember, those ground details and even some of the roof details will kind of determine what the structure is. So now that you kind of get that process now, I'll just go ahead and just get rid of this. You kind of know the process. And of course, if you don't remember it, you can go ahead and always just clone and edit this map, and you'll see the process there. Let's go ahead and do something different. Let's go ahead and do Elven. And because there are modular pieces in the Elven pack, so let's go and kind of show how to kind of put that together. And what I'm making is an Elven Loft. And remember, we start from the ground up, okay? And remember, this is just a kind of a loose rule of thumb. It's not, sometimes you might do something out of order, and that's okay. I don't recommend doing details first, but sometimes you might not do the ground, like there might not be a foundation, or if we're putting down a tree, you might put the tree down before you put the roots, because you want to decide where the roots are very deliberately. So let's start with the first part, which is going to be that foliage. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the foliage down, and what we're making is an Elven Loft. So I'm going to create, there's this beautiful trees that we've added, and they're kind of tree clusters. These work great. Now you don't have to put down 1,000 single trees. You can put down these big tree clusters, and it will create like either a dense forest or a nice foliage for you to put like an elven platform on top of. Now that I've put down that foliage, I can go ahead and put down the roots, and I want to decide where I want the roots to be. So now I've started from the ground up, and now we want to put something on top of that. Hey, first time chatter, Samia, we somatic. Glad that you are here. Awesome. Let's go and put a platform on top of that. So that's going to be like our first floor. I'm going to use this. I'm going to go ahead and use this tree dome right here. Let me go ahead and take a look at what other stuff we want to add. Let's go ahead and add the tree top part. Okay. And what I did is I added a couple things in this part. I've added both a circular overgrown platform, and I've also put some trees to overlap that. Let me turn off those trees. What's really nice to create depth is to create an overlapping effect of the foliage, because a tree isn't just flat at the top, right? Its foliage branches out everywhere. So if you throw down a platform and then throw down some trees over that platform, it will give it that more natural feel. Don't just throw down a platform, throw some foliage to cover some of that platform as well. On top of that, let's go ahead and create the next part of the roof. I'm going to use just this elven large wooden dome. That's going to be the roof of that building that's on top of that platform. And I just desaturated it to make it white because it's gold color. And what I found is that it was clashing with the wooden color. So two warm brown yellowish colors didn't look good together. So I just desaturated it to make it white. And because white is a neutral color, it will work with any kind of color scheme. Just know black, white, gray, those are neutral colors. They will work with any color that you decide. So it always works out really well. Just remember that. From there, we're going to want to create the pop-outs. Remember, we talked about having some pop-outs, and all I did was just take some elven buildings, and I just desaturated them, made sure they're on the same brightness as that dome, and then attach them. And then don't forget those ancillary buildings. And I just used the same buildings, but I dropped the brightness down to make them a little bit darker. Remember, contrast is how you show height. Notice that building that's on top is very bright. It's because it's most exposed to the light, and therefore it's going to stand out and seem a bit brighter. While the buildings on the ground are further down, and so you're going to darken them to make them darker. So if you have a very tall building, just remember that the roofs can be kind of bright, and if you have small ancillary buildings that are much not nearly as high or as tall, you can go ahead and just drop the brightness down a little bit. Remember, contrast is how you show depth. I'm going to go ahead and select everything and turn everything else on. Remember, that last thing that you can do is to throw down some lamps, and then put a light source on top of that. And the way that you choose your lighting is just whatever the structure might be. Because I have a circular road going around this Elven Loft, I've just decided to put a lamp where each street connects into that circular loop, so that way there's lighting along that route. Now, if you're wondering how I made the city stuff, don't worry. Next week, next Wednesday, I'll be showing you how to create cities from beginning to end, because there's actually a really easy process that makes cities go by much quicker. Remember, process is key. All right, so we kind of finished that Elven Loft. Let's go ahead and work on the next one. Now, there isn't an official Dwarven pack that's been released, so you'll have to think a little bit. Can you block the light? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. Go ahead and ask our moderator and see if they can help you with that, because I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that. So that might be a nuanced question. So I mentioned that we don't actually have a Dwarven pack, but don't worry about that. You can go ahead and manipulate existing stamps to make it look like it's a Dwarven theme. And I'll show you how to do that with a cool technique with recoloring, and I'll show you how to kind of make your own stamps in this way. So let's go ahead and start with, of course, I'm going to make a Dwarven Fortress. And we're going to start with that main structure first. And what I did is I just went ahead and took desert structures and I desaturated them to make them gray. And then these are not actual modular pieces, but they're two desert fortresses that have been put together, and then a desert temple as well. So I went ahead and just pieced these three stamps together to kind of create this axe shape Dwarven building. So you can see there's kind of an axe shape right here. I was just thinking dwarves, so it kind of makes sense to kind of have maybe an axe shape. And I want you also to notice what's up with access as well. Notice carefully that none of the staircases are leading, kind of running into the building. They're not kind of leading off into nowhere. So make sure that when you are piecing together pieces that aren't modular, be very careful of the baked-in staircases that are already on that structure, so that you don't accidentally block off. You wouldn't want to put another building that is attached to right here, because you would cut off access. You wouldn't want to put another building right here, because it will cut off access, unless you're going to make it flush right against that balcony wall right there. So whenever you're piecing stamps that are not modular, just remember to be very cognizant of your access point, so you don't accidentally kind of broke those off. Let's go with also some ancillary buildings. Remember, we mentioned ancillary buildings. And when it comes to, remember, making a symmetrical shape, notice that I put some buildings off to the side that are not symmetrical with the other buildings, so that way I'm breaking up the symmetry, because this whole thing right here is very symmetrical. Okay, and that and that looks cool, but you need to add some outbuildings or ancillary buildings that will break up that symmetry. Remember, we talked about that. Now, let's go ahead and throw on some other stuff. Let's go ahead and throw in, oh, oopsie, you know what? I forgot to show the foundation, by the way. My mistake. But we'll start with foundation. But notice that I just did the same thing. I just ringed the entire block with the platforms, just like I did with that Bard College. So now you don't have to use foundations for every single block that you create, because I realize that will be time consuming. But if you have a really important structure, like a fortress, a castle, a cathedral, a temple, using foundations, those platform stamps are really, really helpful, because it's going to help to make that block or that structure stand out because it has that platform. While those city blocks that just are residential, they won't have those platforms. So it's a great way to make your buildings pop out from the other more stock buildings on your map, okay? Let's go over roof details as well. All I did was just kind of throw in a purple, I sticked with the desert stamps, so I made this purple triangle to kind of represent, maybe there's something at the top of that pyramid. Could be a power source. It could be an important material that the dwarves worship, whatever it might be. That's why it's at the top of that temple right there, because it represents something important. So I've just added that, and you'll notice some staircases right here to continue on access, because without those stairs, it just looks like there's no other way to get to the other part of the fortress. So remember to throw on some additional stairs if your access seems wonky. Remember, you want a continuity and access. Very important. Let's go ahead and throw in the last part, or two more parts. Let's throw in details. And because it's dwarves, I threw in some crates, some barrels, and some of the cranes. And that works great because this block or this fortress area is up higher due to those platforms. So having a crane there to maybe move materials that are necessary to keep the fortress stocked with, I don't know, food goods, foodstuffs, weapons, ammunitions, whatever it might be, materials. So throwing in some crates and throwing in some cranes kind of fits with the dwarven theme. Now, the last thing that I want to mention is recoloring. Whenever you desaturate a stamp, everything turns gray. But there's something called trim, and trim is those parts of the stamp where, like for instance, where you see that purple, that's called trim. And maybe you want to recolor the stamp to fit a kind of theme. Remember I used purple with that diamond or that pyramid right there? What I did is, all I did was just take the path tool, set it to color, and then I picked the color that I wanted. And I also made sure to turn off my shadow, my shadow blur, and my intensity, because you don't need a shadow. We're recoloring. We're not creating shadows. So turn off that shadow. Now, there is one caveat when using the color blend mode, is that if the stamp is much brighter, that means the color purple will show up much, much brighter. Okay, so if you want a darker purple, the stamp will also have to be darker. Let me give you an example. Let me go ahead and open up that main structure. I'm going to select everything. When I go and turn the brightness down, notice that the purple becomes darker. If I bring the brightness way up, if I bring the brightness way up, you'll notice that less of the purple shows up. So remember, the brighter the building, the less the color will work. So really, making the buildings darker is a good idea. Otherwise, you'll have to use a different blend mode. And you can use different blend modes, but the color blend mode works best for this. Just remember, the stamp has to be darker. That's the trick, okay? Recoloring is a great way to color parts of a stamp to fit a color scheme that you want. Because gray is a neutral color, any other color will work just fine. So it doesn't matter if I made it green or blue or red. It doesn't matter. Whatever you decide. So recolor. This is how you recolor a stamp using that color blend mode. Okay. All right. Well, I believe that's everything for the Dwarven. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. I hope you found that recoloring trick useful. I really enjoy it myself. Now with the desert, we're going to create a large bazaar. That means, a kind of a large open air market where people can go and pick up their goods. Now with this one, we did release some awesome canopies so that you could create your own open air bazaar. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how I would put that together. And it's not that complex, really. Let's go ahead and open the Desert Bazaar up. Let's start with your buildings first. There's not a main structure. There's just a series of buildings that are going to have canopies attached to each other. So sometimes when you're kind of creating your own building, it doesn't have to be just one massive building. It can be a series of buildings that make like a compound or complex. That's what this Desert Open Air Bazaar will be. It will be technically kind of a complex. So there won't be a lot of details. We won't have to add in a whole lot of stuff here. But let's go ahead, and throw in those canopies. And so these canopies kind of create the illusion of there's a whole bunch of tapestries and canopies just kind of attached from each building, kind of creating some shade for the people that are in the bazaar so that way they're not frying hot in the heat. And so putting that bazaar will be easy now. All you have to do is just put down the regular desert buildings in the configuration that you want, and then just attach the canopies. Just make sure that each part of the end of each canopy is attached to a building. Otherwise, it's look like it's floating. Look carefully right here. It kind of looks like it's just floating. So we're going to make sure to put an ancillary building or a market stall or something like that. So remember, we started with the biggest thing first, the buildings, the canopies. Let's move on to the next thing, which you would expect, market stalls, right? You would expect market stalls to be in a bazaar. And I've placed them to make sure that they're a layer below the canopy, so it shows that those buildings are taller than those market stalls. Okay? From there, I'm going to throw in some vegetation as well, so it kind of looks nice. Vegetation is a great way to add a little bit more color and a more natural feeling to that block. And the next thing is to throw in some details. And what you would expect in a market is going to be crates and barrels, of course. You don't have to worry about putting anything in the crate. At this scale, you don't need details like that. So don't worry about filling those crates with anything. Just use the regular stock crates and place them, of course, next to the market stalls where the goods, the products, or the services are going to be. It only makes sense, right? You wouldn't put the crate in the middle of the street. You would put the crate right next to the stall so that way, that vendor can reach into the crate, the barrel, or whatever, and restock whatever's in their market stall, right? So it kind of makes sense. All right. So that was super easy to make, the super easy bazaar. Let's step into modern for a moment, okay? Now, we don't have a modern set, but you can totally use HSBC and use some fun tricks to create or mimic modern, and it's not that hard. It's actually quite easy. I want to mention just a couple things that you can do to make it look more modern. One, make your roofs dark or black, because most roofing shingles or roofing is made with black material. The reason why is because it is what absorbs heat. It's what keeps the heat inside the building. So it's very clear. Modern buildings use this dark shingling to retain heat and to capture the sun's heat. So if you need to know how to make a modern building, it's not too complex. Just desaturate the hip or A-frame building or whatever building that you're using and just drop it to black or desaturate it to 0. And then that will more carefully mimic modern housing because most buildings use that dark shingling. Now you can also use desert buildings by dropping the HSBC or the saturation to 0 because there are flat buildings that have modern drainage systems on them. So those desert buildings will also work just fine. Just desaturate them. Okay. And then I don't want to go into any more details, but you'll notice that I used platforms for the blocks and of course the path tool to kind of create the dashed lines. We'll probably create a whole stream on how to make modern buildings in the future. So let's just jump in. We're going to create a bank, and a bank can be a large structure. A bank needs a parking lot. it needs the main structure. It's going to have some curbs. It's going to have access points. It's going to need some vegetation. So a bank is a great one. So let's go ahead and put together a bank to show you how to put it together. So first, as always, we're going to make the foundation or the curb. So you notice that the curb is right here. I've created this curb, and I've created this other part of the curb that we'll put some vegetation on. And I've created some access points as well. So obviously cars go in and they go out. We'll make them specifically in and out. So that way there's a nice flow of traffic. We don't want cars bumping into each other trying to get in and out. So the foundations are built, or those curbs are built specifically to create proper access. Now we're going to go with the main building, and I'll show you how to put together these kind of buildings. Let's go and put the roof, and let's put the walls in. My mistake here. Let's start with the walls first. There is a wall stamp set, and when you're making your own custom flat building, such as a bank or whatever, you want to have this flat because a lot of buildings, modern buildings, are very flat. And the way that you create your own modern flat building is just by first using the walls and piecing together the shape that you want. Once you've pieced that shape together, you can go ahead and use these stamps from the Elven style. And it's basically just a patch of dirt, and it's going to be yellow. But if you desaturate it, it will look like it's the top of a roof, some stucco or whatever that roof material might be. And so it will mimic a roof. You just put those inside of that wall area, a layer below, and that will create the roof space. So you don't have to fill it in with the add mode or the mask tool or anything. Just use that patch from the Elven style, and you can fill in that modern building. Okay, from there, let's go ahead and throw in some important stuff. Let's throw down some, let's see here. Let's go with our roof details. Let's go with vegetation first. The vegetation there is just to kind of, I've created these trees to kind of block the back side of the bank so that it kind of adds some nice natural aesthetics. And you'll see some bushes in the front of the entrance here as well to kind of give a nice aesthetic entrance. Let's go ahead and do roof details. And what's really cool about roofs is that you just need to create some important things like a air conditioner unit, and you can just use benches. And the benches just has these two buildings right here. These two things right here are a bench. Two benches, just put two side by side to create an air conditioner unit. So that way you notice that maybe there's an office right here. Maybe you want to show multiple offices. So put a whole bunch of AC units lined up right here. Put an AC unit right here to maybe where the lobby is. Whatever you want. So if you want to know where certain things are in the building with modern, all you have to do is just throw down a couple AC units or benches. So that way you'll know, hey, that's an office or an apartment building or whatever. So just throwing in those details. Let's go ahead and throw in some additional details. I'm going to throw in some benches. And I'm going to create some line work to create the parking lot. Path tool is the best way to go. The way that I did this was simple. I just used the path tool with the segments. I picked a white color that I wanted, and then I turned off the shadow, and then I used those segments. And all I did was just create one long line that goes across to show the width of the parking spaces. And then I just took one path right here, copied and pasted it, and then used the grid as a guide. And then this kind of creates the parking spaces. So it's basically going to look like this. People can go in, and then they can go and park here. If they want to back out and leave, they can go out this way. Okay? So you've got access, and you've got the parking spaces necessary to kind of get in. So modern buildings, not so complex to make, quite easy. Just use the walls and that Elven patch to put everything together. I'm going to go ahead and do the last bit of stuff here. And I've kind of added a clock tower. That's what this desert building is right here. I just desaturated it, and I put that in the front. And sometimes some banks have a clock and kind of a scrolling marquee on the front of it. So I've used this piece right here to show a clock tower in the front. So when people walk into the bank, they can kind of see what time it is. So they know what the hours are and everything like that. So that's that last part with your modern buildings. Not too complex. Just use those platforms to create those curbs. Use the path tool to create your line work. That means whatever it might be, dashed lines for your roads, sidewalks, caution, yellow. Use yellow to kind of show a caution area. Just use to make a caution kind of paint, whatever. The path tool is going to be your ally, and you don't need to use a pen as well. You can do it with a mouse with just the segments, because you're going to use it for the segments, unless it's like maybe a curved road or something like that. But for the most part, you'll be able to use segments. You don't need it, so it's going to be helpful. Let's go ahead and do that last one, and that's going to be Sci-Fi. And Sci-Fi is, we do not have an official Sci-Fi pack for this style, so you'll have to make your own. And you know what, when it comes to Sci-Fi, there's a kind of a guide that I use, is that I don't want it to look like it's modern, and I don't want it to look like it's far in the past, whatever architectural style. So what I tried to do is to go with as minimalist as possible, and then just to add some minor details to kind of create this kind of illusion of kind of a sci-fi feel. I use the path tool to kind of create this microchip lines that kind of connect those buildings together. Just going with, when I go with Sci-Fi, I'm just kind of going with less complex. I'm going with a very minimalist style, because that's kind of what I expect from Sci-Fi. It's kind of minimalist, unless it's like maybe like an Imperial Sci-Fi, something like Warhammer 40K, where there's just a lot of, beautiful encrusting statue work and all that stuff, whichever your Sci-Fi is. But for this one, we're going with a very minimalist style, and we're going to make a power station, basically. And we'll kind of start with that main building first, which is just going to be this pyramid. I'm going to make this the light source, just like I did with the Dwarven. I kind of used a purple pyramid. I'm going to use a blue pyramid, and this is going to act as like a power source that kind of fuels a city or fuels a colony somewhere on another planet, whatever you want it to be, right? And I'm going to throw some details as well on top of the roof. So I've kind of created some circular towers that kind of hold the diamond together, and then kind of added another details on the top. So this is kind of a nice piece that kind of makes it look like, hey, this is a power source. That's why it's blue, right? It really, really stands out. And you can throw on a light source as well to kind of create this bluish glow. So it kind of looks like, hey, this is very clearly a light source. Let's also throw in some ancillary buildings. And all I did was just kind of take the blue domes from the desert and put it on top of these desaturated desert buildings. And then what's really nice, again, more path tool, and kind of created these wires. Now I know in Sci-Fi, the wires might be hidden underneath all the paneling, but what's a great way to kind of show that something is electrical or is some kind of technology is just using a black path at various widths, and then just kind of create these wires that lead from one stamp to another. It's a great way to kind of create, the wiring or tubing. If you want that to show on the outside, you can use the path tool for that. So it's kind of a great way to kind of create wires and create that technology. All right, well, that is it. Those are all the buildings that we kind of put together. I can kind of just want to mention that, all of these are actually pretty quick to make. When I put these together, these only took about 10, 15, 20 minutes. Just depends on how much detail that you're kind of putting together. But the process is really what's going to help you. If you feel lost, follow that process, and it will make it so much easier. Because it always is where to start. Where do I start with this to kind of put together that buildings? With that process, you know where to start, and you'll know where that finish is. So remember all the things that I taught you in this stream, and I'm learning from you as well. Next week, we're going to be creating full-on cities. I'm not going to make a super, super massive one. I'm just going to show you the process from 1 to 10 or A to Z, so that way you can make cities quickly. So that's going to be next week. I'm super excited about that. I hope that you found the tips and tricks that I provided in the stream, you found them useful. I also recommend that you absolutely join our Discord server. We have an incredible community there, and everyone there is so helpful. Just remember to sign up. Remember to go to #roles and then to go to hashtag roles and to get that Inkarnate role, because you're going to want to see every single channel in the server. Okay, so definitely join our Discord server. And feel free to ping a mentor if you need help. That's what mentors are there for. I'm a mentor, and we have some mentors here. So we have an incredible community that's incredibly helpful. And I also want to mention that if anyone has ideas for future kind of points of interest like this, modular buildings, let me know, and I can keep making more and more kind of these modular buildings. Eventually, we'll have a group to stamp feature, and eventually all these things that I create you'll be able to use on your own maps. So if you have any, maybe any kind of requests, like maybe you want me to make like a magical wizards arena, or you want me to make a coliseum, or whatever it is, let me know in the chat or in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, and maybe I can make some of that stuff, and maybe you can clone and use that later to kind of help you as inspiration, or you want to use for personal use on your own maps. Okay, well, hey, that's it. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. I'm really excited for next week's stream. Again, thank you for being here, and I will see you all very, very soon. Please stay safe and healthy, and merry map making. Goodbye, everyone.